Okay, welcome to another episode of eCom at One. And today's guest is Daniel Peach. Now, Daniel is the Retail Digitalization Lead at Google. How are you doing, Daniel?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for
Great.
inviting me.
Oh, thanks for coming on. I'm really looking forward to this one. And we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into YouTube ads for eCom store. We're going to have a little chat about display. Is the plan, Daniel? Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so I think before we sort of get into the nitty gritty and some of the sort of strategy parts, I'm quite intrigued to understand what the process was for you becoming the retail digitalization lead at Google. How did that sort of come about, and how sort of talk about that for us? That'd be great.
Yeah, I have probably a non-traditional path for most Googlers. I think the company initially was engineering heavy, and so most people came from that side. We've rounded out a bit on the business side as we've gotten more mature. But even then, a lot of people have media backgrounds. I studied accounting at university, so very, very different to marketing. Worked in audit for a few years and kind of transactions, so like mergers and acquisitions and bankruptcies.
Okay.
Very interesting now that the markets are changing.
Yes.
So helpful on that front. Yeah, and then I went into consulting for aerospace and defense, so the U.S. Army and the U.S. military.
Oh wow.
So very, very different to marketing. Didn't touch it at all for years. Yeah, and then I went to business school and came out, and I did an internship with Google on Google Marketing Platform. So kind of the enterprise level, ad buying platform. And then, when I finished that, this job was open and it seemed interesting. So I was very new to retail. I'd kind of worked with a few retail clients, but yeah, the past almost 2 years, I guess 2 years come November, have been a big education on retail and on marketing in general. So.
Wow. Okay. So from accountancy to aerospace to marketing to specifically retail, sort of leading up the retail side of Google. Wow, that's quite
Yeah, somehow.
fantastic. So I think obviously Google Ads and the different aspects of Google Ads, the different sort of platforms and areas. We've talked a lot on the podcast about Google Shopping. I know that's something very much you on a lot, talk on a lot. But I'm keen to dive into display and YouTube. Where would you say is a good place for those guys that are listening in? They're maybe getting started on the display side and on YouTube as well. Where would be a good start point for e-commerce stores?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we dial in just on retail, the question is, what are your goals coming out of it? Because YouTube, I think traditionally has been used more for branding. So if you think classically of a film trailer, that kind of really punchy, really engaging advertising. And what we're seeing shifts in the way shoppers are interacting with YouTube. So, for instance, somebody might search for Nike trainers, for instance, on Google.com. Often they're then going to YouTube to watch reviews or learn more about the product. So it's becoming a bit more lower funnel as well as upper funnel. So I think if the aim is awareness, which is kind of a more advanced form of advertising in the sense that you really want to anchor on performance, as an e-commerce brand. But if you do want to invest in awareness, the formats there are really kind of those skippable videos. So we call it TrueView, that as a way to boost your search performance. So lower CPCs, really, have an additional reach or additional surface. Yeah. And then I guess briefly on display, display is now part of smart shopping campaigns, which you may have seen. So whereas we used to recommend standalone strategies on display, now if it's a retailer in particular and you have a feed that's lined up, you can use display basically as additional reach, through smart shopping campaigns. So it's become a lot simpler.
Yeah, no, great answer. So using on YouTube specifically, using what maybe search ads as your sort of main performance channel or shopping ads, but then having YouTube as a sort of secondary awareness option sitting in there as well to help drive and sort of get people over the line as it were as well on search.
Yeah, I think if the, awareness is something, we're seeing brands that are a bit larger and that, haven't been as materially impacted invest in awareness. And what we saw in the last recession was brands that invested heavily in awareness ended up gaining a lot of market share, just because
Yeah.
what we see during recessions is, the first thing to go, it tends to be branding. So those that have the capacity to invest in that will tend to overperform in the years, as recovery happens.
Yeah, great. So remarketing, what would you say, what would be, sorry to start again, what non-remarketing audience would you use for display if your target was to get the highest possible ROAS? What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so taking maybe a slightly Google-centric lens is we're moving a lot toward automation. So less manual optimization. And part of that is, so smart displays, we have smart shopping campaigns and smart display. And smart display is kind of embedded in smart shopping campaigns, but it's a bit of a standalone. So remarketing and then what's called similar audiences, they're both on automatically, so no need to opt in. It's more of an opt out. And I think the idea is display traditionally has been used for remarketing because we know conversion rates have been historically sub 5%. So the idea is if you can continue to show, those, whether it's in this case inventory. So maybe going back to the trainers example, if you're showing that exact product all over kind of Google's display network. The idea is, bring them back into the funnel, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Similar audiences is the idea that we can look across all of these consumers and understand what the purchases have been and recommend products that are maybe similar or that they may like. So in addition to trainers, maybe it's shorts or maybe it's other workout equipment, or maybe it's a different set of trainers. So it's pulling from the product feed and chasing the highest ROAS. But using, again, automation.
Yeah, I know that's something our team has had a lot of success with similar audiences. Yes, yeah. It's, but you have to get to a certain level in your account to be able to do that. These
Right.
guys that are maybe listening in that are, how sort of, what do you think is a reasonable spend or a reasonable amount of data to get to be able to get the most out of using similar audiences for these guys that maybe, they're maybe a year or two into their e-commerce journey. They may be maybe doing between 100 grand a month to $1 million, a couple of million a year.
Mm-hmm.
What's the sort of stepping stones to be able to use similar audiences?
Yeah, I'd say so. Similar audiences is because it's built into. So that I'll start with all of the smarts. We have like smart bidding, smart shopping, and smart display. We're all built for smaller customers, actually. They weren't built for our biggest customers. And the idea is kind of level the playing field a bit. Yep. So yeah, it is a good point. I think as a standalone, audience, as you said, you have to build up to it. I wouldn't overcomplicate it. So if you do use manual, then yeah, you can sort of manually, you can opt in on audiences, but over engineering these campaigns can often come at the cost of ROAS because you tend to break it down. You build basically barriers around the scope and the breadth of what they can reach. Yeah. And what we found is the automation just kind of does it itself. So if you target ROAS, for instance, it's going to chase and give you the highest results. But the more stipulations you put on it, the more restricted it's going to be in its ability to do that.
I think that's the same with a lot of whether you're putting restrictions on something. Well, what we see, we refer to it as bid. It's a slightly different thing, but like bid stacking, where you go, right, we'll adjust this and we'll adjust this, but then we adjust this, and before you know it, you've adjusted 9 things, and the sort of compound effect of adjusting all those things means you've got literally like a 3% chance of getting in front of your audience, which you have to be quite careful what what levers you do pull, because you end up pulling too many, and then you're not getting in front of any audience potentially. Because quite often what we see at accounts is, a client might come to us and say, I need to get 5 times ROAS. Well, to get a 5 times ROAS is easy in any account if you don't spend much money. So it's trying to get, obviously you need a ROAS. The way we see it is you need a ROAS, but you obviously need a conversion value target as well, because getting a ROAS of 5, but only getting a few £1,000s in sales is not going to help you sell the products that you've got in the warehouse, etc., etc. So trying to get that balance and pull not maybe all the levers in one go to then hit the ROAS, but then you might only get a few, a small amount of turnover, because we do see that a lot. I see that a lot where, they've maybe got they're happy with the ROAS, but then the turnover is just not there. So it's then looking at the opportunities within the account, whether that's where the biggest wastage is or where the biggest opportunity is, and looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing is, so ROAS is adjustable, right? So you can set a target and that target can move. And the higher you set that target, the more restricted the number of kind of potential shoppers you're reaching. The other thing is, I mean, ultimately you can still target sales and loosen that a bit and get people who are maybe not quite at the stage of about to click kind of to buy. They may be in that kind of branded keyword space, if you will, or even higher up. So you can reach them earlier in the funnel and still target sales, but try to broaden your audience a bit. Because I guess the other thing is sort of how well do you know your audience? I think a lot of e-commerce brands do know their audience, but it's impossible to find that exactly in, given digital advertising. So ultimately, it's going to search for people you may not have realized, maybe tuned into your brand and may be willing to buy. Especially with smaller brands, actually, because you may get a couple of sales a year. So if the idea, from the same person, so if you don't have a repeat buying behavior, you may not know that somebody that is in kind of your addressable market is actually tuned in. So it's kind of, it's a bit of kind of loosening that, but letting I know it's a bit uncomfortable, but sort of letting the technology do its job and find these people at the best prices. Yeah.
Brilliant. So I think with e-commerce stores, usually the sort of go-to format and the go-to seems to be shopping and search. But obviously we're talking about YouTube and display. And I think quite often when we talk about YouTube, it's quite a new thing for most merchants, most e-com stores. So what would you say to the guys listening in? What's the best opportunity or the biggest opportunity right now in YouTube ads?
Yeah, I kind of going back to the performance focus, I'd say True View for Action. It's a really nice compliment, and I guess one of the challenges, videos, a new format for a lot of people. If you've been working in search and shopping, you tend to have product catalog photos. You can create search ads pretty easily. YouTube relies largely on creative excellence. And that can be difficult. It takes some experimentation. We also know that videos can be quite expensive to create, more expensive than other forms of creative. So one thing we are launching is called Video Builder. It's basically template videos in some sense. So you can access a catalog of music from YouTube. You can use a couple different formats or templates. So it basically lessens the load and it democratizes in some sense the ability to create videos for your brand.
That's usually the problem, I think, with video ads, is obviously that creative side. I know there's a lot more tools out there, and a lot more tools sort of with one-off fees and whatnot. But obviously, if you guys are building that in now, that's going to be great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And the other thing I think we're experimenting with is video on display. So using that network and integrating video into it. So theoretically, you could optimize for each channel. I think there are a bunch of sort of creative excellence tips that we can go into if you like. But the idea is there are certain things that we found that work really well on YouTube. And it might be different to say Facebook, for instance, or other kind of platforms that you advertise on. In that it's the use case, I think, for YouTube is interesting. We're seeing people tend to watch longer videos. They tend to have audio on, which is not true of other video platforms. Okay. So the way you even create those videos, I think, is interesting, because you almost have to like optimize for the platform, but ultimately it's a huge channel, so you can get a lot of traffic out of it.
I suppose it is very different to Facebook in that quite often you're scrolling through Facebook and you don't want the volume on, but when you're on YouTube, you're expecting to watch something. So you're expecting the sound, aren't you? So you have the video, you have the sound on. What you say, yeah, yeah, pretty obvious,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Everyone's like subtitles, subtitles, subtitles for Facebook. Whereas YouTube, would you still recommend subtitles on as well, or is it?
Yeah, I think it's probably a best practice. I mean, you can design the video in a way where the subtitles make sense because you can see where the subtitles are. So making sure that it doesn't block your logo, for instance.
Yeah.
Simple things like that. But yeah, I think it is. I think it's 95% is the stat. So 95% of people have audio on when they watch a YouTube video. So I mean, it's just an extra from a sensory perspective. It's an extra way of reinforcing that brand messaging, both visually and then through audio in case they happen to be listening.
Yeah, great. So we touched on looking at YouTube ads, and we touched on also similar audiences. Is there any other audiences you think work that work well with YouTube ads?
Yeah, I'd say so. Maybe I think of it as a kind of concentric circle building out in terms of intent. So if you think, I guess, at the center of the circle, we have an audience called custom intent, which is looking at so from a shopper by shopper level, which keywords they've already searched for. So it's the clearest form of intent, and it's on YouTube, right? So it's going to look at what they've searched for on search and then connect that. I guess going out a bit, you can look at what are called in-market audiences. So the idea is similar to custom intent, but just kind of a lightly sort of maybe a level out, if you will, where they've expressed interest in products that you have, but maybe not necessarily your keyword specifically. So more of like a category keyword than a brand keyword. And then we have life events, which are interesting for some businesses. So if you think of, I think classically, I'm in the process of buying a house. So I've been shopping for furniture quite a bit. A lot of Made, a lot of these kind of furniture brands. So I am like at the perfect moment for home moves. But the same is true of maybe marriage, of weddings, of that kind of thing. So you're
seeing a lot of products that you didn't think you needed, and now that you're now about to purchase lots of things that weren't on the list initially for the house move.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting too because when you work in marketing, you're acutely aware of how you're being marketed to. So across Instagram and Facebook and Google and everywhere, I'm seeing a lot of furniture. So I can appreciate it.
Yeah. But yeah. It's been quite a bumper category, hasn't it? Or vertical in this last 3 or 4 months. The whole DIY house, garden, obviously, huge things. And we'll come to that towards the end. I think it'd be good to look at some of the specifics on that. So going back to the creatives, I think that's where I think quite often when we look at accounts and we look at agencies that have looked at accounts and worked on ad accounts, you've got this sort of the mechanical, the sort of numbers side, then you've got this creative side. And they're two very different skills. Very rarely you get the same person that can get an A star on both sides. So it's quite often having that team within an agency that can work on both sides. But what sort of tips would you give on the creative? What sort of things? I know you've given a few already, but is there anything specifically, anything else that you would give that will help our listeners to stand out in their creative on display on YouTube?
Yeah, we so more for YouTube, but I would say we use this framework. I was in consulting, so I love frameworks, called ABCD. So if I'm remembering correctly, it's attract, brand, connect, and direct. So attract would be kind of appropriately framing in a tight frame. You'll see this actually in Google's advertising. So if you've ever seen a Google ad, they're very visually appealing, and they usually have a very tight shot because you can get distracted if it's kind of a wider shot and there are too many things to pay attention to. There's particularly for YouTube, the first 5 seconds. We know that we have the audience for at least 5 seconds, just given kind of dynamics. So having a couple shots in rapid succession really brings the audience in the first place and may encourage them to watch even longer.
Yeah.
There are, by the way, formats that target different lengths, so you can kind of select it's like 5 seconds or 6 seconds, 15 seconds, etc. So you can go for shorter or longer formats. But yeah, the first 5 seconds are obviously the most compelling, and you want to kind of hook. And then interestingly, humans on the front end really resonate. So if you think of the classic one, I think is beauty products, where you obviously want to see that with a human or on a human because it's a very human-centric product. But even things like maybe cell phones, which are more traditionally kind of techie and you may see in isolation, it's still humans. I think there's just an instinctive response that we have.
Seeing people with the product or in the ad, is
Yeah.
products on their own is what you're saying.
Yeah. So on branding, I think the logo is really important because you may have full attention and you may have partial attention. So you really want to make sure the logo is there throughout. So this would be both visually and then auditorially, or I'm not sure what the word is, but anyway.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'm blanking, but anyway, yeah.
Audio. Yeah.
So having the logo present really in the first 5 seconds, because again, that's the hook. So if they happen to, our videos, we have skippable and non-skippable ads, but most people will go with skippable ads. So if the idea is that they could skip it, you want to at least get them to see the logo. So then it operates as maybe a slightly better version of a display ad at that point. More engaging, and you've got audio, but that way you guarantee that at least they see kind of the equivalent of the ad in the first, before they skip. I think in general, the more creative elements on the connection, that's, agencies are really good at this piece, finding the right hook. So depending on your brand, it may be humor, it may be an emotional connection, it may be something really thought-provoking. It's really contextual. And just having a clear call to action at the end of it. Or during, right? So I saw an example the other day. It might have been EasyJet. I can't quite remember. Ad recall is, important, but it was an instance where they showed prices. They sort of flashed prices up for different destinations. So Tenerife, 40 pounds or something. And really that in and of itself acts as a call to action because you think, oh, right, it's that price, I should jump on that. So
no, that's fantastic. That was a real quick fire round there. Lots of great stuff there. Obviously you're in and out of accounts all the time. You're in and out of the platform all the time. You must see some reoccurring themes of sort of mistakes that people make that maybe are things that you could highlight to stop our listeners making. So sort of what are some of the biggest mistakes you see in sort of displaying YouTube ad accounts?
Yeah, I think it's about thinking how do you differentiate your usage of display and video from your usage of, say, search and shopping, because you can use all of them really for performance. On display, I think the risk there is, again, over engineering. You can really kind of overly segment. And I think it's not just us. I would say I think Facebook is also moving somewhat toward automation. So the idea is, the performance is getting better over time. We're seeing CPCs drop over time, and so there's maybe a jump in trust there. And I know this is something that a lot of brands have kind of struggled with is really trusting the tech. But it is getting to the point where the automation is working exceptionally well. So making that big jump toward automation, and really starting to push that, frees up time for creatives. And on YouTube, it's probably just thinking about how to optimize for YouTube. So what's the real use case for YouTube for your brand? Is it, it's not just on paid, it's also on organic. So do you have kind of product reviews or product demos on YouTube? Are the videos, again, kind of going through those creatives? Are they designed for kind of shorter attention spans, which is what we're seeing, but enough to engage and build awareness, or encourage people to take action? So it's really thinking through why you would use YouTube in addition to search and shopping.
So really thinking it through, and then not sort of over optimizing, over segmenting.
Mhm.
And what you're saying there is use a lot of the smart technology that is,
Yeah, I mean,
it is,
it's a bit self-serving on our part, but it really is designed. So more of just a general sense, on across search, shopping, display, and video, we are moving toward this kind of full reach concept. So we know our products have been complicated. So onboarding is complicated. Feed integration can be complicated. Usage can be complicated. You have to have basically a full degree in Google and a full degree in Facebook and these other ones to understand how best to use the platforms. And obviously, entire industries are built around that. But what we're working toward over time is this idea that you should be able to just kind of input your whatever your objective is. So it could be new customer acquisition, it could be re-engagement with existing customers, it could be awareness, it could be consideration. Really thinking through that and trying to make it as simple as possible. So ultimate simplicity is kind of the goal for us, but really having the idea of universal reach, right? So really thinking through how somebody can reach customers across all of these properties, right? Because we also have Gmail and we have Discover, which is kind of that news feed, if you will, on Android. And yeah, so it's trying to simplify and really build to level the playing field, is what we'll say.
it's quite an interesting time, I think, where obviously there's the smart everything, smart shopping, smart, and the sort of auto,
Right.
and we have people come on board that have used smart, and had a lot of success, and others that have quite often hit a ceiling where they can't quite. I think obviously it's evolving all the time. Will we ever get to the point where it's just literally, press the button, agree the ROAS, and you can really, really, get a real optimal turnover. And I think that we're there to, in some degree, with quite a few clients that have onboarded with us. It's like, wow, that is actually really good. Can we improve it? But, it's like, how far will the automations go? Where will agencies be needed, in 12 months, 24 months for the day-to-day? Obviously they'll always be needed for the ideas and for, more on the strategy side, but the mechanical sort of movement of, adjusting little, the thousands of adjustments that need to be made in an account. I think obviously as the months progress, it's evolving all the time, isn't it, at your end?
Yeah, we've been actually working on this with agencies directly. So obviously we work a lot with the WPPs and the DANs and everyone else. And I think there is a shift in what agencies are doing and have done. The shift on their end actually toward digital. So that in and of itself has been a big change in the way they do business, because the forms of media and consumption has changed a lot. But also thinking through their natural role. So the media sort of campaign management has been a big part of their business, and and I think the question is, what is their best use case? So as you said, strategy and kind of creative, that's becoming even more important, because if you think about kind of democratizing the playing field on things like performance advertising and even awareness, we're moving toward automation on awareness as well, or kind of upper funnel. That makes the creative even more important, and you can start to see how certain companies stand out. It's more obvious on things like display and video, but it's equally important on text, because if you have really compelling keywords or taglines or whatever it is, you'll see the changes in performance over time. And agencies, I think, are much better equipped than, obviously that's not our business, but also customers themselves. It's that years of experience that's built up that I think agencies really excel at, understanding what works best.
Interesting time, isn't it? I think that's probably about 4 years ago. I think from our standpoint in the agencies, we went really full in on using automation and building out different automation suites, different automation scripts, and I think we have about 30 now that we focus on. Obviously that's not using smart shopping, that's using our own scripts that we work with primarily. But I think for those e-com stores that I see that they might have 5,000 or 20,000 SKUs and they're still doing stuff manually. It's literally it's impossible to be able to keep on top of things, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah, I guess the other point is, I focus just on Google, but we're not the only advertising, platform. So the other piece of it where I think agencies are doing really well and are investing is media mix modeling, right? So looking at their new advertising, Amazon didn't really have much of an advertising business a couple of years ago, and suddenly it's a juggernaut. It's growing really quickly on things like sponsored product ads. So you can really see, there are different use cases, and we know that some customers do really well on Facebook, on Instagram. Some do really well on Amazon. Some do really well on Google. I think the expectation is that everyone tends to invest across different channels to reach different audiences and with different messages, but we will never, because of the kind of walled garden concept, somebody has to sit on the outside and oversee all these different platforms and understand them, and that's I think where agencies excel really well.
Yeah, great. So we're sort of 4 months ish into lockdown. Obviously, quite a lot of the country are sort of back in their workspace. Obviously, a lot of people are still working from home. Obviously, we've seen a lot of industries really flourish. Obviously, other industries have their own challenges. We've seen a lot of things like click and collect has really come out as a big winner for a lot of people. A lot of stores doing the click and collect, a lot of supermarkets, a lot of restaurants, takeaways, all different industries doing click and collect. What's some of the newest trends that you've seen that have really spiked in the last 4 months that you think will be here to stay? The changes that we are now going to become sort of the new normal, on the digital side.
Yeah, I think, unsurprisingly, e-commerce has shot up. Stores being closed really shifted purchase behavior. So the most obvious one is groceries. A lot of people have started, kind of downloading apps. So in the UK, it's Ocado. It's, trying to think of some of the other ones. It's probably, Amazon, actually, a few of the, a few other grocery delivery brands. And so that's been the most obvious one. But we've seen from a category level, an interesting kind of a pull forward, if you will, of home and garden. So as you said, DIY projects, but also outfitting the home office, outfitting the home gym. There's been a pull forward on that. And I think specifically for that category, if you think about it, bigger purchases will tend to be made in the summer. So seasonality is a bit different to say something like apparel, which may be also, weighted toward the summer, but have a big kind of holidays, end of year period. The question there is, have people really shifted that? Have they kind of maxed out on the purchases they're going to make in, kind of Q1, Q2? Or are there still things that have deferred down the line? We were talking about, sort of home buying, and I was pleasantly surprised last week by Rishi Sunak's stamp holiday. Really personally beneficial, which I hugely appreciated.
That was a good day, wasn't it? That was a great day.
It was amazing. Yeah, one of the best days I've had probably this year. But the other piece of that is, I think something like £5,000 maybe for green projects. So, there's an incentive, and the question of whether the stamp duty holiday is really going to kind of stimulate more house moves and house prices. We may see activity in home garden still.
Drive the purchases for home and garden.
Yeah. I think the other big trend, apparel has been hit, which is not a surprise. People aren't really going out, so they're not buying outfits, although that's shifted slightly. So people are buying more kind of things they can wear in the house, and a lot more informal wear because they're not necessarily going to work.
Loungewear.
Yeah, exactly.
Fitness clothing's been strong, I think, hasn't it? Has it? Like, a lot of people have been training at home, doing more workouts at home. Has fitness been a good category for the last 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, it has been. And the sort of telling sign to me is the number of friends that I have that have bought Peloton bikes. It's incredible. That business you see it in the stock price. The business is doing exceptionally well. And something like that, I think I don't want to say they were struggling, but I know they were trying to figure out how to position themselves, and I'd heard several podcasts, maybe an FT podcast about it.
A few sort of PR challenges they had, wasn't there, at the beginning of the year, I think. Yeah,
they had, right. Yeah, so I think that category has been doing well. Yeah, I think the other thing that we've seen, which is fascinating to me, is it sounds like a bit of a diminutive term. I don't think it's designed to be, but the idea of the silver surfers. So this would be people over the age of, you can define it as 55, 60, 65, who may not have extensively bought or who may never have used e-commerce before. And the usage rates really spiked because behavior shifted entirely.
yeah,
Yeah, and it hasn't gone back to normal. I mean, we haven't gone back to normal, so it's not so surprising. But those rates are actually holding even as stores reopen.
yeah. So then a lot of those are probably using it for the first time, or more hesitant prior to lockdown to use it, whereas now not a lot of option, and now they've crossed the line. It's like, oh, actually, it's not that bad. That's great though, isn't it? That is really good that out of this sort of 3-4 months and moving forward, sort of that generation are going to use the internet more and have now almost been forced to use it and purchase more. And I mean, when you mentioned some of those brands you mentioned, look at sort of the stock values of some of those brands. I mean, like you meant like eCommerce, Shopify, for example. I mean, that their stock, I think it's on like from sort of mid-March, it's about 3x now, 300%.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. It's just crazy. And then obviously the amount of people then that have then gone on to, I think they were giving away 6 months of, 6-month trial of Shopify. So then the amount of people that may have had their retail store that they've had to then close in the short term have then popped up with their e-com equivalent. It's just giving a lot of opportunity out there as well amongst all the sort of craziness. There's definitely verticals and industries that have really, really adapted well. Great.
Yeah, there's a lot of headroom there. I think one stat I saw, I think it's 52% of UK small and medium-sized businesses sell online. So if you think about that, I mean, granted, you might have a pub, for instance, which is not likely to sell online. It's a very service-based business. But if you think about a lot of stores that just have never, maybe don't have the time or the capacity or the kind of a baseline understanding of how to build out a website and how to create that channel, now is the best opportunity to do it. And services like Magento and Shopify and BigCommerce have made it a lot easier.
They certainly have. Yeah. So final question, Daniel. I like to always end with a book recommendation. Do you have a book that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I'm toggling between two right now, actually. So I tend to, get a little bit bored, so I go back and forth. It's funny, it's been around for a while, but I've been reading Homo Deus, which is the sequel to Sapiens. Really good book, really thought-provoking, and it kind of looks at from the agricultural revolution on how humans have evolved and what the future looks like, which is the idea that humans over time will seek longevity. So what does that look like? Does a human living 150 years or 200 years, what kind of impact does that have on society and on our infrastructure and that kind of thing?
Oh wow, that sounds very interesting. Interesting. That'll be straight on the Amazon checkout after this.
Yeah, it's good. It's on there. The other one that I've been reading, which is a bit more topical now, is called "Why No Longer Talk to White People About Race." So this is a book. It's an author from the UK, and so it's whereas I think a lot of kind of Black history is centered and anchored on the US and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all of that. This is really squarely focused on the UK. So it's been a nice education in the experience of Black people living in the UK, and something I'd recommend.
We've got 2 recommendations there. Fantastic.
Yeah, highly encourage you. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So for the guys listening in, if they want to connect with you, Daniel, what's the best place to sort of connect with you directly?
Yeah, I'd say LinkedIn. I tend to monitor it pretty closely. I think it's linkedin.com/Daniel Peach, but either way, you can find me on there. So by all means, I'd love to connect.
We'll link it up in the show notes. So this podcast will go live in a couple of weeks, and then there'll be a full transcription on the podcast, and then we'll link up the books and your LinkedIn profile as well. Well, thank you very much, Daniel.